Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart, and I'm here to facilitate a conversation with our host, Peter Scalzo, 20-year cancer journey. And we've had so many different conversations now. We're getting close to 100. We're in the 90s, right?
Oh, yeah.
How are we at, Jack?
This is 96.
96. Wow.
Whoa.
So we're working towards 100 episodes. So,
Yeah.
and today,
Recorded.
episodes, yeah. So,
Yeah.
well, by the time this, yeah, fair enough. So, but we're glad you're here joining us for another conversation. And I think last time we shared quite a bit about, I'm going to call it just a tool for healing that it's called story work. We put a lot of resources out there from Adam Young and, a few others, I guess. I guess I shouldn't list all of them, but in this moment, but just how this worked. And so today, I'm going to ask Peter, I'm going to let him talk for a second beforehand, but I asked Peter to share a story, and a story we talked about, and it's been shared a little bit at a different level of detail, I think, but at a nice level of detail, story of your cancer diagnosis when that you had mentioned earlier, and you can give all the details of it, and we're going to just use this as an example of story work, of really getting into the details and the weeds and just how to listen to this story and interact on it a bit. And so anything else you want to share before we get kicked off today, sir?
Once upon a time. No, I
can't start stories with once upon a time.
I think that at first the jury's been out for me as far as the effectiveness of like doing the story work, as we call it. But yeah, as a tool, right? So I'm part of a group of 10 guys, 11 guys. And so every week we meet and somebody will tell a story, and there's 4 guys that'll comment on that particular story. And usually we do a story of harm and a story of blessing. And at first I was like, oh man, I don't want to go back into the past or think about this or write this down. But I think the value of it, especially for me in writing it down, has been kind of a deeper analysis about what was I feeling at that point, like putting myself back into the context of that time and place. For instance, I did a story about when I was 12 years old. I did another one about when I was 5. But I try to remember as many details as I could, but especially what came back to me a little bit easier were the feeling parts. The emotions, because I was like, wow, I remember having that feeling. And so then I sort of like, it was like looking down on this particular like 12-year-old Peter and what was going on and what happened to 12-year-old Peter. And the value has been for me, just in doing the story, is to document an event in my life which had a lot of impact without fully understanding that impact. And that's what the community of guys are going to do. They're going to help me understand even more fully, like to have other people look into that scene.
So tonight you're going to share
like a stage. Yeah.
a scene from your life at this level of detail with a group of guys. And you're going to have 4 or 5 guys who will be directly responsible for listening to. Yes.
Called story work. And so now I'd like to share as best I can. I don't have it written down, but
I want to comment too before you do. Yeah, because I shared a story last week. So in our story work group, so it was my first share in that group, and it was a story of harm. And I had put it probably on a scale of 1 to 10, a 5 or a 6 is the way where I put it at when I started out. And so, and it was good because I had been holding on to this story for a little while, and I had crossed it, I think, in the 30,000 foot level a few times in my recovery journey. And so the ask was to write the story down and to share this period of time. And it was probably reflected on about an hour of my life, but it's an incident, a situation that happened. And what was interesting was, as I shared this story, some of the guys started asking me questions afterwards, and I recognized that person, that young kid in the story, was somebody that I despised, and it still was there for me. And I remember one of the guys in our group, Andrew, is like, can you forgive that little guy? You know, and it's like, I don't know, you know, and I didn't want to be that little guy. And maybe my entire life I've strived not to be that person who shows up in that story. And I was sharing it with another one of the buddies who's part of the group, and he shared some of his own expression, but he was actually able to enter into the story with me. And by entering into the story with me, he helped me to reinterpret what was going on with myself at that point in time. And it was so healing to have him reinterpret what was going on, not just in an ethereal way, but in feelings and real connection. And I found that there's a burden that's lifted. There's something that I could accept about who I am. And you were kind of talking, it's like one of the concepts we put out last week is that we are our past, our past story. And the reason why we say that is that we act out of what we believe about ourselves and who we are. And that's still true today. I still act out of this story about what I believe about who I am. And so I need to project something that overcomes this other person that's part of my story. And man, being able to see that, and if I can release and understand that story at a different level from having healing come from this group of guys who could reinterpret that story, which is what happened. But it took a lot more thought and interaction and even more interactions post that. But and the point of raising that is it happened in community. Could not do that by myself.
Right.
Cannot have my story reinterpreted by myself.
Right.
I actually need somebody to do that with me.
Yeah.
But man, there's so much healing that's flowing from that experience, and it's just a short period of time. And so, wrote the story, shared the story. And when I started getting some comments, I was numb at first, but man, it went from a 5 to a 7 or an 8 in feelings inside. And then connecting those feelings with still being there and still acting against that story was important for me to see. And I didn't actually think I was, but I was and have been. So,
Yeah. And the scale is between 1 to 10, right? So a lot of my stories in the cancer context, I would immediately go to a 7, at least a 7, because of the trauma that I felt. Now,
so the story you're going to share with us today, where are you at on that story right now in the scale of feeling?
Yeah, I would say definitely a 7. Yeah. So the situation and the background is I'm around 42 years of age, and what had happened was I changed my career about 12 years earlier. At the age of 30, I went to law school, and I had 3 kids at the time, had a 4th in law school, so I graduated from there at the age of 33. So I'd been practicing law for about, I would say, 8 or 9 years at that point. Definitely had more of a comfort level with the practice of law. I think for the first 5 years, I wasn't exactly sure about. I had partners over me, fortunately, helping me, but I didn't have a comfort level exactly. And so in my practice, I had somewhat more of a comfort level at that point. But for 1 year, I had not felt well. And the context of my family, importantly, my mother, she was on a cancer journey herself. And she had terminal cancer, ovarian cancer. And finding that out is a whole nother story that's high on the chart too. That'd be very high. Because my mom was that unconditional love in my life, kind of that safe person. And she was my go-to. And so she's struggling with a cancer journey. She's really had a lot of surgeries, treatments, everything. And I'm going for a year not feeling well, and I'm seeing blood in my urine. Hematuria is when you can actually see it. And I had that going on. And I had been to 2 different urologists that had said to me, "Oh, it's a benign prostate issue," without really checking it. You know, they had not scoped it or done any kind of a scan. They would analyze the urine, send it out. It didn't come back with any cancer cells in it. So it's like, okay, this is not a big deal because he's so young. He's very healthy. I was always a workout guy, always. Even then, I was running 4 miles a day kind of thing. And my home situation was that I'm married. How long? I had been married for 21 years. I had 6 children at that point. My youngest child had just been born. And I remember being very stressed out in my job and with my family, and all the other commitments that I had gotten myself into, like church, political. My firm that I was with had a rule that I had to do at least 3. I had to be involved in at least 3 community clubs or whatever I had an interest in, because the object was that I would form relationships and those people would do business with us. Mm-hmm. So I was super, super busy. But every time I went to the bathroom and I saw blood, I would, the feeling was the feeling that you would get when, almost like a shock feeling, that instant of seeing blood. It's like, oh my gosh, something's really wrong. That shouldn't be there. Yeah. And notwithstanding that, seeing the blood when I went to the bathroom, but not feeling well. And so going to 2 different urologists and, just in the area, because I would leave one urologist who they'd give me like an antibiotic. That didn't do anything. Went to another one to get like a second opinion, and that didn't work. And finally, I went to my PCP. And I remember he was a PCP for my grandfather, for my dad, smart guy, part of a group. And I remember going to him, and he examined me, a digital rectal, prostate exam. And we sat in his office, and I remember saying to him, I just can't live like this anymore. I think something's really wrong with me. And he said, well, this is what I'm going to do. One of my best friends is the head of the urology over here. I'm going to send you to that group. So I went to see him, and the big wig in this group, and he said, well, I think you have a benign condition, and so he sent me in to get simple X-rays, and I noticed, as I didn't know is this normal or not, because I never had anything major wrong with me, but I'm at that point I'm maybe 43 years of age, and I'm laying on the table, and it just seemed like they were focusing. The X-ray machine was focusing on one area, mm-hmm. And again, I had that. It's a feeling of the blood rushing out of my head, and like terror, like if you
This is when you were in the...
Yeah, like getting these X-rays, or when I see blood, it's kind of like that feeling of you turn the corner in your house and you think you see someone there, but they're not. They're not actually. But the blood rushes out of your head, and you're like frightened. It's that fright, and that's how I felt. Those were the feelings of, why is the camera focusing on down this area where I have the blood? It was like something inside of me was like, there's something wrong. Mm-hmm. And so they scheduled me after that for a cystoscopy. I don't even know what that was. I'm like, I have no clue what that is, really. And I didn't bother to research it, but I showed up. And I remember them saying, okay, put the gown on, remove your clothes, put the gown on. And I'm like, I wonder, what's going to happen. And in this particular urology practice, I mean, now I've had, I don't know how many of these things, hundreds. But in this particular urology practice, I laid down on one of those metal tables. I remember the metal table kind of thing with a tiny thin pad, but I remember it being really cold.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the doctor coming in. It was just me in this examining room on this table. The doctor came in and his nurse came in. And he had instruments there, and I didn't know what they were for. And he grabbed me. I'm not sure what word I want to use for the podcast. He grabbed my private parts there, and he said, "Okay." And they put some some kind of a Novocaine topical, lidocaine kind of thing on it. And he was like, "Okay, I want you. Okay, relax. Not really explaining to me what was happening. Relax." And he started to stick this scope, this thing, down my you-know-what. Well, when you're tense, the muscles tighten up inside there, and it's really hard to get anything through. For years, I've been cathing myself 6 times a day. So I know how to loosen up now and to breathe and all that, but I was given no instructions on how to do that. And so it was kind of like forced up through.
I can feel the tension as we're sitting here.
Yeah,
Yes.
forced up through, and I'm gripping the sides of the table, and he's saying, I said to relax. That's like saying, I'm telling you not to be mad.
Yeah.
You can't just like stop this.
Yes.
You're in a place you shouldn't be right now. And then I remember him, he was inside looking at a screen. I didn't look at it. Pulled the instrument out. And he said, "You have nodules." Very fast, very quick, like he had no time. And I didn't know what that meant. And he said, "These are almost always cancer." That's the first time I heard the word cancer.
Mm.
And he turned to leave the room. I physically grabbed his coat.
Mm.
And I clutched him and I said, "What do you mean, cancer?" He turned around. He wanted to leave that room as quickly as he could. He turned around and he said, "These are almost always cancer. And I'm going to have to do a procedure on you where I scrape it out. And then we have to analyze the growths." And he left the room. And the nurse was sort of cleaning me up and stuff. And it was the blood leaving my head and I think I'm going to throw up feeling. And anger, how could you just callously say this to me and leave the room? Great amount of fear. What does this mean? I don't understand at all anything about this. I'm a young, healthy guy. And so that led up into scheduling a procedure called the TURB, which is the transurethral resection. They go in and they scrape out the area because they have to go inside the bladder, scrape out what they can of these growths, and then stage them and grade them. That happened. He did that. And I remember waking up in the operating room, and it was supposed to be outpatient. And my legs were shaking from the pain. I remember that. And they came over and they gave me something for the pain, and my legs stopped shaking. But he was walking away, and I said to him, "How did it go?" And he wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't stop and look me in the eyes. And he said, "Fine." And I knew deep down something was wrong. Something was radically wrong. And they admitted me after he said you wouldn't have to, it would be outpatient. And I was 3 nights in the hospital with that. And I tried to get the information, like, why am I here? And the answer was because the bladder was punctured. And so the bladder needs to heal. You need to have a Foley catheter in there, and the bladder needs to heal. And I was like, why would the bladder, like, if he's just scraping these things out, why would it need to be? So I didn't get explanations. And I remember being in the hospital, and it was really weird. I woke up one morning, and there were people there at my bed who I tangentially knew. And I was like, well, I don't know why you're here right now. Like, they were visiting me. And I'm like, it didn't make sense to me. Like, I could understand a family member being there, but they were like, it's not like I spent time with them or knew them all that well, but they were there. And I didn't quite understand that. A lot of things weren't making much sense to me, so I was just sort of going with it. And I didn't know what it all meant because I didn't have the final diagnosis yet. So I was just kind of going with it. And I don't know what my family was doing at the time. The work knew that my job knew that I needed to get this done. And it wasn't until the result came back, and that's a whole nother story. Going to his office. My wife came with me, Leslie came with me, we went to his office. And that's when I heard the news of what type of cancer it was.
And right now, when you experience that again, what is your emotional feeling of that experience?
Fear. And
at what level? Where's your level?
It's funny because I'm 20 years on this journey, but it's still pretty high. I mean, I've been 20 years in the cancer space. I've been told twice 50 surgeries twice, but I still, when I think about that story, that event, how it happened, I didn't feel comfort. I felt fear. I don't think anyone came alongside of me and put their hand on me and said, I was getting ready to ask, it's okay.
One of the things that I heard that wasn't described in the story, and it may have been there, I'm actually curious, is you didn't describe who was with you throughout the story.
Yeah. I was talking with my mom on the phone, but she was in her own place of deep hurt with pain and suffering with her journey. I'm sure Leslie was a busy mom of 6 running around. And we didn't have this, and I'm sure she would say the same thing, so I'm not speaking out of turn, but we didn't have this emotional connection with each other. So I think Mom would have been the one who I felt comfort from. And I don't remember feeling that comfort in this part of the journey. I don't remember someone coming alongside of me and taking a deep interest in it and being with me.
What's the word you would put on it? I'll give an example. I don't want this. You choose you were alone. You were
alone. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there were people around me, my brother, people at my workplace, Leslie, but and church people who were like speaking into me.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember that. What would have really spoken to me was that person that came and kind of cried with me. I'll say it that way, but just kind of put their arms around me. That kind of comfort.
Does it relate to, like, the thing that seems interesting to me is the story. As you roll into the story, you build the case for all the things that are happening in life and busyness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's as if there's a question about everything was minimized. Like, even it's interesting that the doctors even seem to be minimizing it's just, you know, a benign item. You know, you said there were 3 doctors that looked at you. That seems really interesting. It took 4 attempts to get this looked at in a serious way.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time it got to the 4th one, it was done in a very cold manner, cold and uncaring manner. But that minimization up until that point, what do you make of that?
I am unhappy about that. I'm a little angry about it. I'm also saddened by it. I remember how I felt. On the one hand, I thought to myself, well, they must know what they're talking about. Maybe this is not a big deal. So deep down, I'm like, I'm being a hypochondriac over this thing, right? But then on the other hand, as I look back, I feel like I was a number, that there were assumptions made about my health that shouldn't have been made.
And is that hypochondriac label yours or theirs?
Mine.
And is that a story that connects to another story?
Maybe. I was sick a lot growing up,
Mm-hmm.
and I missed a lot of school.
Mm-hmm.
But I generally was sick, so
Mhm.
I'm not sure. I mean, to me, hypochondriac is maybe the person feels like they're sick, but they're not actually experiencing what they think they are. They think, it's a person who thinks that they're dying when they're not.
Yes, but sometimes in our families,
Mm-hmm.
especially busy families, it's an inconvenience to have sickness around. And even in your own, the way you laid the story out, it's as if you've built a picture about how busy and active life was.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm even curious if the story you were telling yourself in your head as you were going into something that was getting ready to turn your life upside down, that was this appointment is an inconvenience, and I'm not even sure why I'm here. You didn't take time. One of the things really interesting me is you didn't take time to even look at what a cystoscopy was.
No.
You just showed up, and all of a sudden, something that's somewhat of a violation, if it's never happened before, happened to you.
Yeah.
And so that seems traumatic in a sense. So what you're describing.
It was. Yeah.
Because you had no idea what was getting ready to happen to you.
And contrast provides clarity, right? So when we're not at that part of the story here, but when I did find out the stage and the grade, I always had in the back of my mind, I would call Memorial Sloan Kettering if I ever got a cancer diagnosis. I just had a lot of respect for the institution. My experience down there was radically different in all these respects than my experience locally.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about tying 3 components together here. And one is the question about your personal level of feelings of, this is an inconvenience and minimizing.
Yeah.
Second is the fact that you felt alone. It's as if there's a family story of minimizing what's going on here. And then there's a third story, which is a medical community that minimized this. until it became revealed in the next story you're going to tell. I say in the next leg of the story, which is, oh, there's a major issue here, and it's not small, it's big.
Yeah, this man has a life-threatening condition.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you connect that to being part of your story,
Mm-hmm.
is there a personal side? Is there a family story? And is there a medical story that needs to be understood and explored and known?
Yeah, I think the family story is a busy, high performance, high image group of people that, one family member struggled with mental illness that was tried to be just kind of sort of swept under the rug. And this feeling of you go to work when you're sick.
Yes, say
You know
that
what I mean?
again.
You go to work when you're sick. It doesn't matter if you're ill or not. Yeah.
Why?
Because the job must get done.
Yeah. And you laid this story out
Mm-hmm.
in the very same manner. All the job was getting done,
Mm-hmm.
and you came from a family that the job must get done. And so in this story speaks to a family value that is it the highest value?
It's pretty high. I don't know. I'd have to look at the values and rate them.
Yeah, I'm actually not
very
trying to make,
high.
There's no accusation. I'm actually,
It's a high. Yes,
yeah.
it's a high.
And I say that
value.
because, man, I can relate to that story of the job must get done.
Yep.
Rain, shine, sick, whatever. You will get out and make this happen no matter what.
Yep.
And how much of that still exists in your current story?
not much for me personally, because I've accepted the fact that I'm on disability, that this health journey has been incredibly life-changing in many ways, thrust limits on me.
Yes.
And put me into a place where work is not a prevailing notion anymore. In other words, if I got my value from work, then now does that even apply to like the ministries that I'm involved in? And
Not looking to overanalyze. I actually wanted to highlight something in that I see, and it's your journey in your cancer journey. A medical illness was part of the thing that brought you to a healed value.
mm-hmm.
And it sounds crazy because you were forced to slow down. You were forced to change your values, to not minimize this. And now, the man that's sitting beside me here today values a slowed down spirituality, not a output-based spirituality, but a contemplative something. But that came from your cancer journey. And so just reflecting on the story of there's a story of harm, and then there's also a story of blessing embedded in the story at the exact same time. And it's kind of a fascinating dichotomy that's taking place here.
Yeah, I mean, said it to me? My daughter said it to me the other day on the phone. She said to me, "Dad, I think your cancer journey has been a blessing because of who you are." She said, when we were growing up and we weren't doing something, she said, "I think you were angry." There was this performance-based. As a dad, I was like, everyone needs to be productive. I'd walk through the door. And I'm sure people got up and started to pretend like they were busy or something as soon as I walked, because it's like, uh-oh, Dad's home. That performance-based junkie is home.
Yeah.
And my daughter said to me the other day, she said, "Dad, you in recovery and doing the inner work," she said that she thinks the cancer journey has been a blessing for me and for her and for the kids.
Yeah. A blessing and a curse at the time she's not.
Blessing and a curse.
Yeah. It's not minimizing the cancer, but it's recognizing that it's built something in you. Well, so I'm feeling a little trapped here because I have so much to explore with you that I'd like to do right now. And I also recognize we're over time, but so I wanted to just highlight a thing or two here. Just that, in doing this story, you felt this story, and I felt being there too. I mean, just the idea of this cold room and holding onto the table as something's happening to you, and you're not quite sure, and then the feelings of aloneness, and then the dismissive of your human feelings of this. You're in a place of unknowing, and to have your feelings dismissed is something I think almost all of us can relate to in some way. And so there's a lot to think and act on, and then to connect that to your family story and your own personal story, and to understand that has a lot of meaning. And what I wanted people to really just reflect on a little bit is that each one of us has stories just like this in our lives that you have, and you refelt this story, and there's been a lot of healing that's taken place. And I also want to reflect on, if you notice that my role here wasn't to say, Peter, what you struggle with is,
Right.
And it's to ask you questions like, hey, how did you feel? Where were you? Where were your emotions? What connects of the things that you felt and shared, and to ask questions that I would, it's like, hey, who was with you? And the role is to ask, to bring clarity, not to diagnose. And so as you're listening to someone's story, it's to find clarity, to help them explore their own story, but not to give a fix, because there's no fix that I can give. All I can do is be someone who has a different perspective in exploration. And so I want to thank you today for sharing this experience with us, me personally, and others, and to be able to enter in the story, I can feel also. And to be able to feel with you, and I know producer Jack, listening to the story today, got to feel some of that story too. And to be able to feel your story is part of the healing process. And to build empathy to, hey, where you've been has a lot of trauma, but your story is really important.
Thank you.
And so,
thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that today, and giving us an example, a little bit of how to walk through a story that has trauma in it, and feelings, and a lot of connection to your overall story, because that's a small story in a bigger story.
Right.
And
because there's a huge timeline with a ton of events.
yes.
Yeah.
And so just being able to walk through that, I think you're demonstrating a little bit of how to heal and to find peace in the middle of the storm.
And we all have those events, right?
Yes.
In our timelines.
We do.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
So thank you everyone for listening today, and join us again.
Yep. Thanks.